Hi everybody, this is Lori at the Calico Cat Quilt Shop, and I'm going to show you today how you can make little baskets like these. Fun little baskets on your sewing machine. It actually doesn't use a whole lot of sewing, but there's a little bit. So, and you can either put a handle on it or leave the handle off, but they come out kind of cute and useful too. Okay, so what you're going to need, and we're going to do, just going to pop this down, this size basket today, and it's really hard to tell with this plaid. I think it'll be easier to see with the one that I'm working on here, but it's going to use 5/8 of a yard of fabric, whatever you want, and this time I'm going to use a batik. I think I'll show you here. Switch views. So you can see that you get a little bit of fraying, a few threads come loose when you do this, and so I'm going to try the batik. I don't think it's going to be quite as bad that way. So I've done a couple of different sizes, but this is the one, this is the size that will make the most use of all your materials. So along with the 5/8 of a yard of fabric, we're going to use 5/8 of a yard of Peltex, Craftex, whatever brand it is. It's going to be a heavy fusible interfacing or stabilizer, an ultra firm stabilizer by whoever's brand. If you use the Pellon, it's a 72F. But either way, it's an ultra firm stabilizer. So let's get started. What I'm going to do first is take my piece of stabilizer, my Pellon, Peltex, and I'm going to cut it. Go to this view. I'm going to cut it into a 15-inch piece and a 5-inch strip, and I actually cut mine at 20 inches so I know that if I take 5 inches off, or about 5 inches off, I'll be left with a 15-inch piece. And I don't have a ruler that I use that's big enough, so I'm actually going to use my mat, which I usually don't do, but since I'm not quilting, this requires a little bit less precision, perhaps. So I'm going to use the corner here, and I prefer if it's a little bit over 15 inches to start with, and then I'll trim it down. So this edge is at about 15 1/4. So I will trim this one to about 15 1/4 as well. Over here, it's straight. Okay, and then I can get rid of that for now. So the next step is I'm going to fuse my fabric and my Pellon together, or my Peltex, according to the manufacturer's directions. So, and I can cut this fabric down to the same dimensions. If I take a 5-inch strip off of it and then cut myself a 15-inch square, and I'm going to use the same fabric on both sides. Okay, so if I just take off a 5-inch piece, I'm going to make it a little bit bigger so I can trim it down after I've got the Peltex fused. Okay, So there's my strip. And what I'll do is take this piece of Peltex and just slip it in at the fold. And it wouldn't make any difference. I could start it at the bottom, but it just seems simpler to me. So that's how I'm doing it. Okay, so I've got it sandwiched in there, and then I'm going to take it over to the iron and fuse it in together. And then my other piece here should be more than 15 inches. Okay, because I want to cut a 2.5 inch strip off of there. To do this binding around the top. I like the finished look that that gives me. You wouldn't have to do it, but you'll see we're going to do some basting, a basting stitch around the top, and then this helps hide that and just helps hide all those raw edges. So if I take my 2.5 inch strip off, then I'm down to about 15 inches. I'll do my fusing with the fabric to the stabilizer and be right back. Okay, I have got my fabrics fused to my stabilizer now, both pieces, and I'm going to trim them down. So I am, like I said, since I don't have a ruler that's big enough to trim it, I'm going to use my mat today. And I went ahead, I've got the folded edge of the fabric down. That side I'm not going to trim, I'm going to trim from that side. And I can kind of feel the edge of my stabilizer, so I know where to trim down. Because I don't need to trim a whole lot off, especially the first side. So get that trimmed down. And then I'm just going to flip it over and put my trimmed side on my 15 inches and try and square it up. And then trim this side to the 0. Okay. And then do the same thing with the other side. The other thing I've done before is stack rulers. It's not ideal, but it does work too. Okay, so now I should have a 15-inch square, and I can go ahead and trim these pieces while I'm at it. We'll do all the trimming first. So this one, I'm just squaring up my edge. And then I'm going to, I've got just a little bit of fabric at the bottom where my stabilizer isn't at, and I'm going to trim that off first, but it doesn't really make any difference if you trim it off first or last. So just slide up till I find it, because you're not going to want that eventually, but so for my 15-inch square, to make the numbers nice and pretty, I'm going to do 4, like I did on this basket, 4 lines or 4 strips, and then I'm gonna put 4 strips across. And so I need them, well, that's not gonna work very well. I need them to be 1.25 inches. And the strips that I add for the horizontals, I'm actually gonna make a hair less than 1.25. So really I'm looking at between 1 1/8 and 1 and, what would that be, 3/16. I am going to try and be consistent though. So I'm going to cut 4 of those strips. And when we start assembling this, you'll see why I want those strips to be just a teeny tiny bit narrower. Because when we start weaving them and stacking them, they will take up more space. Okay, 3. I still got a little bit there. Well, I definitely felt that skip. Okay, so now I've got 4 strips here. I can set those aside. And I'm done with my rotary cutter for now. And let's see. So now what I'm gonna do, if I can get a better angle, I'm gonna take whatever ruler I want and I'm going to mark the corners at 5 inches square. This is what I'm gonna end up taking out, trimming off, and this will be the sides of my basket. Okay, so I'm just gonna go all the way around, and if I wanted to mark the strips that I need to cut, I could do that now too, or I can do that last, it doesn't matter. And you can use whatever marking utensil you want, whatever your favorite is that'll show up. Okay, so I get all 4 of those done. And I'm going to go ahead and mark my strips now before I cut anything, and then just do all my cutting at once. So, and I said that I needed to cut them at 1 1/4. So all I'm going to do is draw 3 lines 1 1/4 inches apart. Oh, it's not very dark. Okay, and then if I did a good job, then this last one should be 1 1/4 also. All right, so you can see my lines there. So now I'm just going to do that all the way across. And when I draw these lines, 1 1/4. When I draw these lines, I want to go all the way up to that 5-inch mark, but I don't want to go past it because that's what I'm going to follow when I cut. And then I'll know how deep to cut them. Okay, one more side. And these baskets, they're useful for anything, whether you want to use them for decoration or to hold things in your sewing room, next to your machine, to put a plant in, you know, just the pot, to use as an Easter basket or May Day basket, or I don't know, any number of things that you could use them for. So I'm going to use micro serrated scissors, and I'm just going to follow these lines and cut. The nice thing about the micro serrated blades on these scissors is that they will reduce the amount of raveling as well. And that's not the look I'm actually going for today, so I prefer if it doesn't fray. We'll see what this batik does, but okay, so I'm just gonna cut, when I do these strips, I'm just gonna cut up to that line, and you should be able to see they should go right up to that line, but you don't want them going deeper than that. But this will make it all one piece for the main body of the basket, and give it a solid bottom, give it a little bit of structure. I do feel like if you make them much bigger than this though, this corner piece ends up being big enough that I feel like I'm wasting too much. So we're going to try a different method with that. Just got a little left in the corner there that doesn't want to go. And you could use other kinds of fusible stabilizers or bags line, you know, like a bag lining or fusible fleece if you wanted to. But if it's double-sided fusible, that's going to help you out quite a bit. Just make it a little bit easier. Okay, so once I get these cut out, and I'll get the other half cut here, and but it takes a little bit of time. once I get these all cut, I am going to fold them up, fold the strips in towards the middle, and just kind of give them a good crease to get them started. It'll make things a little bit easier as I start weaving my rounds. Okay, so I'll finish trimming and be right back. So I've brought all of my pieces over to the machine now. I've got my base with my sides and my 4 strips and my little piece of binding. And I did want to show you, so the reason that I went with a 15-inch square was partly because then the diameter around the box is 20 inches, and this Peltex comes in, it's a 20-inch wide roll, and it's actually just a hair over 20 inches, and so it works out perfect for me to go around with 1 strip. I did trim off just a tiny hair off of 2 of them. These 2 strips are going to go at the bottom, so they're going to be closer to the base where it's closer to 20 inches. And then these 2 longer strips are going to go at the top, and it'll make just a tiny bit of a angle on the side and make it open just a teeny bit wider at the top. And it'll make it easier to slip all of the pieces where they need to go when I'm trying to weave everything at the end. So what I need to do now is take these strips and keep track of which 2 are the shorter 2 and which 2 are the longer 2. And I need to stitch the ends together. And I'm not sure how hard this is going to be to see. I've got white thread in my machine. And that'll make it a little bit easier to see, but yeah, it's still going to be a little bit challenging. This Peltex is stiff enough that it's just a little tough to work with sometimes. So I'm going to switch my machine to a zigzag stitch, and I'm going to shorten my stitch just a little bit. And I actually don't have it very wide either. And I'm going to go back and forth a couple of times just over the span where these are going to join, and make sure I get a good solid stitch in between them to keep them together. So I'm going to go back and forth at least twice, and if I feel like I didn't get it very even, I might even hit it a 3rd time. Yeah, I'm getting way off to the edge now. So I'm going to reposition and just go across one more time. It doesn't have to be real strong, but I still want it to hold up long term. Okay, so lock that stitch a little bit. And then I'm going to trim my threads. Okay, and this is one of the short ones, so I want to make sure that goes to the bottom. Same with this one. And I've tried this with different colors of fabric on each side too. I've tried it a few different ways. If you use 2 different fabrics, then you just want to make sure it's a lot easier to get them right and turn the right way out before you stitch them than it is after, but it's not impossible to flip them around if you change your mind. Let's see if you can see that very well. Hold that down a little bit, keep it out of the way. This one I'm actually hitting the middle. Kind of impressed. but I'm still going to go backwards and get at least a few good stitches in there to keep it held together. But really my zigzag does not have to be huge. It just has to be enough to hold it together. The real challenge is trying to do this in a way so that you can see it on the camera and I'm not getting in my own way. And this Peltex is thick enough that you're going to want to have a nice sharp needle, either a new needle or for sure probably a Microtech needle with a nice sharp point, or it's going to get dull fairly fast. Because a little bit later we'll be going through a couple of layers at a time, and that'll be more of a challenge. Now this one I'm going to set off to that side so that I remember it's one of the longer ones. Let's see if I can get everything to work here the way I want it to. Okay, that went pretty good. Get any loose thread trimmed off there. Okay, now I'm ready to do my weaving. Now here's where it gets really fun. So one thing I am going to try to do, I'm going to try to keep these seams towards one side, and that'll keep it kind of out of the way. And then I just got to decide where I'm going to start. So I'm going to fold 2 strips up, and then every other one from there out needs to come up and into the inside of that loop. However I can make it work. It's going to want to escape, and I just got to keep pushing it back down and working with it, and it'll get there eventually. Okay, so that's not so bad. Doesn't really want to stay down, but not so bad. Then the next round has to go the opposite way. So now I'm going to try to get it to slide in like this. And this is where either pins or some clips can help out if you have problems with it staying where it should be. But I'm just weaving. And I'm not going to worry too much about spacing just yet until I for sure get this string in. And then things will settle out a little bit for the next round. But you can see this side is starting to come up to the top. If it decides to slip off, then I'm bringing out the clips. that one took off on me. Okay. So now I just start working these down and pulling these strips tighter until I get the first 2 rings down to the bottom. And try to get equal spacing all the way around. Because what I want is no big gaps in between, especially in the corners. I don't want to have a big gap like this, or things are not going to line up right by the time I get done. Okay, now I'm going to grab my other 2 rings, and this one should go in fairly easy. I just got to weave through again. But now is when I might want to start using some clips just to hold things in place while I work all the way around. And this time it's not going to make any difference if I put my clips facing forward or facing back, because I'm not going to use them when I go to the sewing machine. I found that trying to stitch, there was no way that I could get the clips to run through with the spacing on my machine. So I had to use pins. So you can either start with pins or just move to pins. And honestly, if you liked that look, you could just leave it with 3 and trim the ends off when you got the spacing that you wanted between them, if you want to see daylight in between them. I'm going for a nice tight basket, but like you can see, this one is starting to jump back up. But once I get this 3rd ring in, and I don't have to clip all of them, but I do want to make sure my spacing, that I'm getting them spaced together good and tight. Trying to keep them that way so that it's easier on me as I go around. Okay, so that one goes in, this one comes out. We could put another clip there. And then see how there's this big gap? I need to make sure I'm scooting that over, keeping that in place, or there won't be enough for all of my strips to get woven in. So I'd get to the end and there's not enough room. And then I'd have to go back and just keep scooting them together until I got enough space. And this, the stabilizer is still soft even though it's pretty firm. So I can squish it a little bit, but overall I don't want to squish a whole lot. Okay, so I've got that 3rd round in. Put one more clip in there. And now I'm going to come back and just keep working them down to the bottom and trying to get them tight. And it helps me if I pull up on the strips, which of course some of the strips are clipped down. But just keep scooting everything together. And then when I feel like I've got those scooted together pretty decent, I'm going to start working that last round in. And then, because I know I can't use my clips, I'm just going to put pins in so I don't have to worry about it. Because otherwise I'm going to have to switch from my clips to my pins anyway. Okay, so when I got most of these going, find that seam and work with my seam again. So I've got a seam here and here, and the other one's hidden back there. So I'm going to make sure my seam is back that way so that I know I've got at least 3 pretty sides. And if my thread matched my fabric, of course that would hide it a little better. But that's not always going to happen. And I'll go ahead and put a clip on every one of these this time to help keep it together until I'm a little bit closer to being all the way around. Once I can start getting these strips pulled up to the top of my round, then I can go ahead and pin. And then I got to decide if I'm going to try to work with it this way with my machine or if I can work above. And I'm not sure which way is going to work easier. If you decide to pin, don't use good pins because this is thick enough. Chances are you are going to bend some pins. So don't use your favorite or your best pins unless you want to bend them. And now that I'm pinning, I'm going to try and make sure I get these right next to each other where I'm going to want them. And I'm pushing my pins down level with the top because that's going to give me a little bit more space. They're not going to catch on my machine as fast. And like I said, if I have to come back and move my pins, so be it. It'll be fine. I can start taking some of these clips out that were just holding that 3rd row down. And everybody gets together. Go with a pin. And I'm just going to put 1 pin through it because they're hard enough to push in as it is. They're going to stay pretty good and I don't need to do overkill. Just more I got to take out. This one's not cooperating. So we're going to talk that one into going where it's supposed to go. Hit this one at the same time. And if I was having trouble or these were getting too tight, I could sure put my clips on there and rearrange the rest of the way around. And then go back to pinning. And I've got a little bit of a crease here, but as I work things out, that will go away. If I've got my spacing going good. So now I'm going to go ahead and go back here to this one. Spacing's getting a little bit tight, but I think it's going to come out okay in the end. And that's where that little bit of flexibility with the stabilizer is helpful. But this is also why I made these strips just a little bit longer than my measurement. Just gives me a little bit more leeway. And it would be an awfully tight fit if I made it the exact same measurement as what my sides were. Take the rest of these clips off. Actually, I can put them aside. So I'm just going to keep weaving, pulling, working things until they're the way I want them. And then pinning it in place. And as long as my pin goes through both layers and then comes back close to the front, it's still going to hold just fine. It doesn't need to come through all those thicknesses. But if it does, that's okay too. So I should be getting down to my last ones here and back to my seam. And I don't need these strips to go above the line. So I'm going to give it a little bit of slack and let it relax down there. But now I'm working from the end back towards where I was at near the middle, and just making sure that I've got my spacing close between my strips. Because it was getting a little squishy over here. So get it hammered out from one end to the other. I just keep going back and forth however I need to till I get everything pinned. And everybody has enough space. So that's pretty close. Okay. Now I'm going to switch my machine. And just do a basting stitch. So I'm going to lengthen my stitch. And like I said, this is the part that's going to be a little bit of a challenge, and you just have to decide which way you want to fight things. Whether you try to cram it in this way, or if you've got a removable part and you can get it around that free arm. If you want to work with that, I'm going to try it this way. I've done it both ways, and it's a struggle either way. Let's see if this is a little bit better view for you. Make sure my presser foot's down. And this is where, going through all of these layers, you really do want a sharp needle. And then it helps if you pull your pins out in time too. I want to try to keep my basting stitches in the top 1/4 inch or so that it's easy to cover them up with my binding, my double fold binding. And I've tried this with the walking foot and it helps, but the foot is bulky enough that you still end up fighting with the bulk of that foot. So it really kind of comes out about the same. So I'm just using a standard foot for this one. I can show you. Here's a pin that I ended up with earlier, but that one's bent pretty good. So that one's going. That one is not sticking around. This one looks like it's getting pretty bent too. Of course, it could have already been bent. It's hard to know. So I just want to keep going around and trying to make sure that these tabs at the bottom are flat so I don't end up with one folded up when I get to it. But as long as I use a nice long stitch, it's not that hard to undo. So I got to keep working this around. The other thing is if your needle isn't sharp enough, you'll start seeing skipped stitches just because of all of the thickness we're trying to get through here with this heavy stabilizer. I think the bigger you make these, probably the easier it is to get it to work in your machine. I mean, if you had one big enough that it went over the top of the machine, it would be a whole lot simpler than trying to squish it in here. But then if you have bigger size, you have to add strips together to make them long enough to go around the whole way. So it's a little bit of a give and take. Hopefully you can see this okay. I'm getting down to my last couple of pins. Since I've got white thread, you can see I'm just about back to where I started. Straighten that one out a little bit. And I'm just basting, so I'm not going to worry about that. Get my threads trimmed. So this is what it looks like right now. And then I just have to decide how I want to attack it again. And we're going to take that binding, and you can pin it if you want to, or you could use clips or whatever, or you can just keep working with it as you go. I think I'm going to find some matching thread for the top stitch, so I'll be right back. Okay, I decided to opt for black thread because at least that's not going to stand out as much as my white thread was going to. And I've changed my stitch back to a regular straight stitch with a normal stitch length. And now I'm just going to add this binding to finish the top out nice. And I'm just going to ease it in as I go and skip the pins. But I do want to make sure that I get far enough away from the edge that I'm getting both sides caught. Otherwise, I'll have to go back to that spot. And trying to keep it straight as I go. That's not a very good angle to be able to see what I'm doing, I guess. Let's try this. There we go. So again, just working it around. But my basting stitch is going to hold everything together. And now I'm going to hide that. Just keep working with it. I thought about trying to use a stabilizer that's not quite as heavy as this, but the thing I like about it is it gives me nice rigid sides that are going to stand up pretty well, and it's not going to fall. The sides aren't going to cave in very easily. It's going to hold its shape. So I decided it was worth the struggle for me. I thought about using fusible fleece because that would still give me some structure, but then my sides are going to be thicker and I'm going to see a lot more white, which if I was using white fabric wouldn't be a big deal, but I feel like with the darker ones I just don't want to see that much white. And of course I could zigzag the edges to give it a more finished look and keep it from fraying. And that would be an option too, to give a nice finish. Just get to put your own spin on it. Should be getting pretty close to the beginning again. There we are. So I'm going to give myself a little bit of space. I'm going to trim my thread. I don't mind that black so much. Get my thread trimmed. And then I'm going to trim my double fold binding so that I can fold a little bit over and cover up that raw edge at the beginning. And again, I just got to keep working with it until it wants to stay where I want it. This is when a nice heavy machine is a good thing. It won't want to move on you quite so much. And if I pinned it, it would probably stay better too, but you know, it's just the way it is. Some of us can be a little stubborn. No laughing. Thank you. Okay. Kind of in the final stretch here, and hopefully I'm catching the front and the back, the inside and the outside. Stuck. Okay. I'm going to get back to that place where it overlaps. Oh, now I'm in trouble. Good thing I was done. Yeah, we got a mess going on. Trim my threads. There we go. And then I can call it good. So I did catch the inside pretty well. And so now I've got a basket. If I wanted to, I could take that extra piece of stabilizer that I trimmed off and put the extra piece of fabric on it, use that as a handle like I did on a couple of the other ones, or I can just leave it like this. So yeah, I will keep working with this and give you any updates. I'm going to work on a way to make a little bit bigger one without cutting so much out of the corners. So we'll see if we can't do that one next. Hope you give them a try or something like that. And let me know if you have any questions or run into any problems. And thanks for watching.